How do you explain? How do you describe a love that goes from east to west and runs as deep as it is wide? You know all our hopes, Lord, you know all our fears, and words cannot express the love we feel, but we long for you to lead. So listen to our heart, leads the sense, hear our spirit sing, hear us sing, a song of praise, a simple song of praise. Those who have read, those who have read, we will use the words we know to tell you what an awesome God you are. But words are not enough to tell you of our love, so listen to our heart.
Listen to our hearts. Isn't that a great thing and a terrifying thing that God knows the heart? When Samuel was sent to find a new king, when God decided that the kingdom would be taken away from Saul, he went to look at the children of Jesse, and one of the things that God reminded the prophet was that he doesn't choose the way man chooses, because man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. So listen to our hearts. It's comforting to know that whatever is in our hearts, God will find. It's also terrifying that what is ever in our hearts, we cannot hide from God. Say it with me, Psalm 118, verse 24, "This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." Remember Hebrews 3 and verse 13, "But exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin." How about judging? You know, I've been amazed that there have been several people through the years that they make no claim to really know the Bible. They make no claim to be faithful Christians, but they know a few passages. Most people have heard John 3 and verse 16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son." They might be able to quote some or all of it. But another passage that people seem to have found and remembered, and at least can quote the first few words, is Matthew chapter 7. And this is part of the Sermon on the Mount, which goes from Matthew chapter 5 through Matthew 7. So it's chapters 5, 6, and 7 where Jesus does some teaching up on the mountain. And you might remember that chapter 7 begins with the phrase, "Judge not, that you be not judged." Now, whenever you start talking to someone about, for example, an erroneous doctrine that's taught by some religious group, they might stop you and say, "Now, the Bible says not to judge." Or sometimes when you talk to people about behavior that they are engaged in that's inconsistent with the life of the born-again Christian, they'll say, "Well, you're just judging me. Stop judging me." People today have even created a new word, judgy. Don't be so judgy. And so I wanted us to, take a few sessions here to look at the idea of judging. Now, you say, "Well, it seems like an open shut case to me. Jesus said, 'Judge not.'" Well, is that really what he meant? Is that when Jesus said, "Judge not," did he mean don't judge at all? Or did he mean don't judge in a particular way? I think if we'll just take even just a casual glance at Jesus' teachings, we'll see that what he was really saying was, I do want you to be involved in the correct kind of judging. I do not want you to be involved at all in the wrong kind of judging. So first of all, let's just finish that particular passage so we have the context where Jesus says, "Judge not that you be not judged, and with what judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me remove the speck from your eye,' and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite! First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." Now, first of all, if you'll just think about that last phrase, Jesus says there is a proper way to make a judgment. You're just doing it the wrong way. And so he didn't say, don't remove the speck from your brother's eye. And I hope you realize in Jesus' analogy here, he's talking about faults. You know, you're seeing a fault in your brother that he's calling there, comparing that to a speck in his eye. He says the problem with you seeing a speck in your brother's eye, seeing a fault in your brother's life, is that you're seeing a small fault when in reality you have huge problems in your own life, faults that need to be taken care of. And so he says that makes you a hypocrite. You know, if you were covered in paint and your partner that's painting with you had just a couple splatters and you said, "Man, you look terrible. You ought to clean yourself up. You've got paint on you." Would that person even listen to you? They'd say, "Well, you're covered in paint. What are you doing talking about me? I have a couple little specks of paint on me." That's what Jesus is talking about here. You are not qualified to even tell someone about their faults when you have such great faults in your own life. So Jesus, even in this passage, is not saying don't judge at all. What he is outlawing is this hypocritical type of judgment. He would also be outlawing hypercritical judgment, where you're being overly sensitive to the faults of others, bringing out small specks that you just don't have a right to bring out. And he's bringing out the fact that we should not be involved in judgment that has the wrong motive. So Jesus is trying to get rid of the wrong kind of judgment here. In fact, when you look at Luke's account of this, which is found over in Luke chapter 6 and verse 37, that might help us kind of identify what Jesus is getting to here. Luke 6 and verse 37, Jesus says, "Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven." Now, you see there that Jesus is trying to get us to do the right thing. Don't judge in a way that you don't want to be judged. Aha, there is the message. It's not a total ban on judging. So all of you out there who've memorized Matthew 7 and verse 1, "Judge not that you be not judged," go back and do your homework about what this verse means. I want to real quickly bring to your mind something that happened over in John chapter 5. John 5 is kind of an odd scene where we're told that there is some water there that an angel goes down and stirs up, and the first person in the water is healed. But there's a man there that's been lame for 38 years, and he can't get in the water because he's lame, and while he's trying to get there, when the angel stirs it up, somebody gets in before him. So over in John chapter 5, in talking about this, this man is introduced to us here and his problem. And down in verse 5, it says, "A certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he'd already been in that condition a long time, he said, 'Do you want to be made well?' And the man explains to him that he can't get in fast enough. And so Jesus says to him in verse 8, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked, and that day was the Sabbath. And what you'll notice is that people start asking him about carrying his bed on the Sabbath because they decided that that violates the law of Moses. And in verse 15, it says, the man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. In verse 16, for this reason, the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. It sounds ridiculous to us, with our perspective. He just healed somebody. Who cares what day it is? But for these Jews, because of their evil hearts, because they were jealous, envious, and they didn't want to lose their position of power, all they could see that it was the Sabbath day. Isn't that amazing? All we can see is the miracle, and all they can see is the day of the week. And so when we get over to that happened in John chapter 5. When we get over to John chapter 7, I don't know, maybe down about verse 21 we'll begin. Because here in John 7:21, Jesus refers back to John chapter 5 and healing that man. This all has to do with our subject of judging. So let's go over to John 7 verse 21, where Jesus says, I did one work, and you all marvel. Moses therefore gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers, and you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry with me because I made a man completely well on the Sabbath? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. Now here, you know that Jesus' teachings cannot contradict themselves. So if Jesus said, judge not, and then he commanded people here to judge, you know that there's more to the story than just judge not. So when he said judge not, he had in mind this, kind of judgment that was from the wrong motive, hypocritical judgment, hypercritical judgment. That's what he's talking about. Don't judge the wrong way. But when you judge, judge righteous judgment. He says here, you're not judging righteously, because if a man needed to be circumcised to keep the law of Moses, you would do it on the Sabbath day. And, that's an interesting study in and of itself. He mentions that circumcision is keeping the law of Moses, but he says it's not from Moses, really. It's from the fathers. And so we first see circumcision with Abraham in Genesis 17. Then we see it in the law of Moses in Leviticus 12. And then we find out that when they wandered in the wilderness, they completely abandoned circumcision, so that all the people that came out of Egypt who were circumcised died in the wilderness, and now you had uncircumcised males. So in Joshua chapter 5, God says to Joshua, circumcise everybody again, because all the circumcised people are dead, because they quit doing what they were supposed to do. So Jesus says, you receive circumcision to keep the law of Moses, but he says it really, it backs up farther than that. And he says, just think about what you're doing. You would do that on the Sabbath day, wouldn't you, to keep the law of Moses? But you want to kill me because I made a man completely well. He says, now just stop and think about, is that righteous judgment? So judge not with that bad kind of judgment, but do judge with